General Hospital spoilers reveal that something has changed in Sasha Gilmore Corbin, and it's not just the aftermath of trauma or the weariness from carrying too many heartbreaks in too little time. It's something deeper, sharper, and unmistakably new, a shift in the foundation of who she is and how she responds to crisis. And in this new version of herself, Sasha is no longer the woman who quietly waits for someone else to come save her. This time, she's the one drawing the lines, making the decisions, and choosing her allies, even when those choices go against everything familiar. That shift, this defining new trait in her evolving identity, is at the center of a rapidly intensifying storm in Port Charles. And at the heart of it all is a bold, dangerous, and possibly irreversible decision. Sasha is walking away from the support of Michael Corinthos and Jason Morgan, and instead, she's placing her future, and her daughter's safety, in the hands of Anna Devane. This change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling that began the moment Daisy was born. Sasha had dreamed that her daughter's birth would bring healing, a new chapter, even perhaps a restored family unit with Michael. But reality had other plans. From the moment Sasha held Daisy for the first time, she knew that love wasn't going to be enough to shield her child from the chaos of Port Charles. The attack and attempted abduction on July 4th was the final straw. It didn't just terrify Sasha, it transformed her. She stopped asking if she should leave, and started planning how. Her instincts told her to run, not out of fear, but out of resolve. Her past had taught her that tragedy never lingered too far behind, and if she hesitated, Daisy could become another loss etched into her soul. But escaping Port Charles wasn't going to be easy, not with her life so entangled with the Corinthos family. And not with Michael still assuming he had a say in her next steps. In the past, Sasha would have gone straight to Jason, trusted his stoic resolve and quiet efficiency to shield her and her child. She might have leaned on Michael's earnest promises to co-parent, to figure things out together. But not this time. This time, Sasha saw the full picture, and she knew neither Jason nor Michael could truly help her, not the way she needed. Jason, ever loyal to Sunny, still lived in the shadows of crime, violence, and secrecy. His loyalty to Sasha had never wavered, but she understood that if she pulled him into this, she'd be dragging her child into the orbit of a man who couldn't escape the dangers that seemed magnetically drawn to him. Michael, for all his sincerity, was too compromised. He was still trying to be the son Carly needed, the father Wiley and Amelia deserved, the ex-husband Willow could tolerate, and the idealized figure in Nina's redemptive fantasies. Sasha knew her needs, her daughter's needs, would always come second in that lineup. That realization, painful as it was, brought clarity. Sasha no longer wanted to be caught in the middle of other people's allegiances. She wanted a clean break, a strategy that prioritized only one thing, Daisy's safety. And that's when she made a choice that surprised even herself. She went to Anna Devane. Anna wasn't family. She wasn't tied to Daisy, Michael, or the Quartermaines. But what Anna had was independence, expertise, and the ability to move in silence. She was the only one in Port Charles capable of orchestrating a real exit, one that wouldn't be intercepted, delayed, or debated. Anna didn't ask Sasha to justify her fear. She didn't question the maternal instinct driving her. She simply listened, assessed, and agreed. What Sasha didn't expect was how easily Anna understood. Perhaps it was because Anna, too, had made impossible choices for family. Had lost and fought and clawed her way through regrets to find some semblance of peace. There was something in Anna's eyes, recognition, maybe even admiration, as Sasha laid out her plan. She wasn't just asking for an escape route. She wanted backup, surveillance, diversion tactics. She wanted to vanish, not out of desperation, but with precision. And Anna, seasoned by decades of espionage and intelligence warfare, knew exactly how to help her do it. They began working in secret. Anna set up alternate identities, reviewed possible destinations far outside WSB radar, and created scenarios to throw off suspicion. Sasha knew she was burning bridges by doing this, especially with Michael, but she also knew she couldn't afford second-guessing. If she told Michael, he'd try to talk her out of it. He'd insist they figure it out as a family, but his version of family was filled with entanglements Sasha had spent years trying to escape. This wasn't about co-parenting. It was about survival. And while Anna worked behind the scenes, Sasha began emotionally preparing for the next rupture, because it was inevitable. Jason would find out, and he'd feel betrayed. Michael would be furious. Not just because she was leaving, but because she hadn't asked him to come along. But Sasha wasn't doing this to hurt them. She was doing it because she couldn't afford to wait for their permission anymore. There was also the risk that her cooperation with Anna could backfire. Anna was being watched, both by allies and enemies. If the WSB caught wind of her involvement, they could turn against her, dragging Sasha into a federal nightmare. But despite the risk, Sasha felt safer in Anna's world than she did in the carefully curated chaos of the Corinthos family. As the days ticked by, the plan began to take shape. Daisy would be extracted first, under the guise of a medical transfer. Sasha would follow within hours, using a forged identity arranged by one of Anna's longtime contacts. They had 3 fallback plans, 2 safe houses, and one firm rule: no contact once she left. No looking back. But as Sasha packed the last of Daisy's things, reality began to catch up. She thought of Michael holding their daughter. She thought of Wiley, of the gentle smile on his face when he played with his sister. She thought of Jason, of all the times he'd come through for her without question. The grief was real. But it didn't outweigh the truth: she had to do this. She wasn't running from them, she was running towards something better, something safer. In the final hours before departure, Sasha met Anna one last time. They went over every detail, every risk. Anna looked her in the eyes and said, "Once you leave, this version of your life ends. Are you ready for that?" Sasha, tears welling up but voice steady, replied, "I have to be. For Daisy." But the universe has a way of testing even the best-laid plans. Unbeknownst to Sasha, Carly had begun asking questions. Jason had picked up on the tension in her voice. Michael had noticed the missing items, the closed doors. And while none of them yet knew about Anna's involvement, the web was starting to tighten. The threat wasn't just external anymore, it was emotional, relational, deeply personal. Still, Sasha remained committed. She had changed. She had transformed into a woman who could no longer wait for others to decide her fate. This new part of her, the strategic thinker, the decisive protector, wasn't going away. It was the result of every mistake, every heartbreak, every sleepless night holding Daisy and praying for clarity. Now, as the clock ticked toward 0 hour, one thing was clear. Sasha was no longer part of the supporting cast in someone else's drama. She was the architect of her own escape, the heroine of her own story, and the protector of a future that no one else could guarantee. Whether her plan would succeed, whether she'd find peace on the other side, that remained to be seen. But what no one could deny anymore, not Jason, not Michael, not even Anna, was that Sasha Gilmore Corbin had changed. And that change, bold and irreversible, had sent ripples through every relationship, every alliance, and every corner of Port Charles. And it was only the beginning. Nina was stunned. Nothing in her recent experience, not the chaos with Carly, not the uphill battle for Willow's trust, not even the lingering pain of being shut out of her own family, could have prepared her for the revelation that Sasha had secretly aligned herself with Anna. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a direct challenge to everything Nina believed she had rebuilt. She had assumed Sasha was vulnerable, in need of guidance, maybe even desperate enough to lean on her again. Instead, Sasha had bypassed all the usual emotional pathways and stepped straight into a world of espionage, secrecy, and calculated departure. It was a change so radical, so unexpected, that Nina could barely recognize the woman she thought she knew. This wasn't just a personal shock, it was the beginning of what felt like a terrifying unraveling. A new madness was creeping in around the edges of Nina's world, and it all centered on the chaos Sasha had triggered. This wasn't just about a mother trying to escape. This was a woman rewriting her role in the story, casting off dependence, rewriting loyalties, and, worst of all, cutting Nina out of the narrative completely. It was a dangerous, unhinged shift, one that created ripple effects far beyond the personal. The shift awakened something obsessive in Nina, a need to restore balance, to reassert her place in the narrative. Particularly in relation to Willow. In Nina's mind, if Sasha could take matters into her own hands and bypass the people who once mattered, then so could she. Her focus snapped back to Willow with an intensity that bordered on manic. If Sasha could rewrite her fate, Nina would do the same, not for herself, but to claim back something she believed was rightfully hers: relevance, proximity, and most of all, control. Suddenly, it wasn't about Sasha anymore. It was about proving to Willow that Nina still had value, that she was still necessary. Nina convinced herself that helping Willow see Michael's instability, his inability to protect all of his children equally, would somehow give her the edge she'd lost. Sasha's betrayal became the fuel for a new mission. To remind Willow who the real threat to her family's peace was, and to position herself as the protector Willow never asked for but clearly needed. This strategy, however, was laced with danger. Nina's mental state was slipping, not in an overt way, but in subtle changes in tone, urgency, and emotional logic. She began interpreting every piece of news about Sasha's departure as a personal attack. She started obsessing over Sasha's contact with Anna, wondering what secrets were exchanged, what favors had been promised, what boundaries were crossed. The more Nina tried to rationalize it, the more frantic she became. What Nina didn't realize was that her attempt to reclaim Willow's loyalty might be the very thing that would sever it permanently. Her renewed interference threatened to reignite every old resentment, not just with Willow, but with Michael, Carly, and even Drew. The idea that she might once again manipulate a family situation in hopes of gaining affection was a recipe for disaster. And yet, Nina couldn't stop herself. Sasha's actions had unlocked a dormant obsession inside her, the obsession to matter, to control, to win. The craziness of this transformation couldn't be overstated. Nina had gone from cautious reconciliation efforts to quietly plotting her own resurgence, leveraging Sasha's perceived instability as a narrative weapon. She began reaching out to contacts, trying to uncover details about Anna's involvement. She entertained the idea of exposing the escape plan to Michael under the guise of protecting the children. She even considered confronting Anna herself, a move that could ignite an entirely new war. Every new revelation, every piece of information, sent Nina spiraling further. It wasn't just jealousy or hurt anymore, it was panic cloaked in determination. She couldn't let Sasha win. She couldn't let Anna become the heroine in Sasha's story. And most of all, she couldn't let Willow drift further from her grasp. She had to act, and act soon, before everything slipped beyond her reach. But in her urgency, Nina failed to see that she was repeating the same pattern that had once cost her everything, using manipulation in place of empathy, control in place of connection. Sasha had chosen Anna because she represented clarity, strength, and action. Nina, despite her desperate efforts, had once again chosen chaos. This was more than a rivalry. It was a psychological break. Nina's obsession with restoring her place in Willow's life had become a consuming force, driving her to miscalculate every move. Sasha, by seeking help from Anna instead of Nina, had unintentionally triggered a chain reaction that now threatened to destabilize not only her own plans but the entire fragile balance of Port Charles. And now, Nina stood at a crossroads. She could double down on her interference, risk exposing Sasha's plans and reigniting old wars. Or she could stop, accept that some people grow beyond the need for her influence, that some mothers protect their children not with noise but with silence and sacrifice. But Nina had never been good at letting go. And as the storm around Sasha's escape built momentum, so too did the storm brewing inside Nina, one fueled by obsession, wounded pride, and the fear of fading into irrelevance once again. The next move would be hers. And it might just break everything. Nina was facing a new threshold, not just of decisions, but of unraveling reason. The woman who once walked the fine line between redemption and ruin was now standing at the edge of something darker, something more erratic. The shock of Sasha's betrayal had shaken her. But what followed was far worse, the slow, creeping realization that Sasha's trust in her had always been conditional, perhaps even a mistake. And now, Nina couldn't ignore it. Maybe Sasha had made a catastrophic error by ever trusting her at all. The entire situation was spiraling into madness. The new wave of decisions, secrecy, and obsessions wasn't just affecting Nina, it was infecting her. This wasn't about maternal instinct or loyalty anymore. This was personal. This was psychological. Sasha had chosen to align herself with Anna, had cut Nina out completely, and that exclusion didn't just sting, it transformed Nina's internal narrative. It planted something new, something erratic. A need not just to be involved, but to control the direction of Sasha's life, even if Sasha no longer wanted her to. What made everything more dangerous was the sheer speed at which things were escalating. Sasha believed she was acting in her daughter's best interest, shielding Daisy from the manipulations and chaos of the Corinthos world, but in doing so, she had inadvertently pulled the trigger on a psychological reaction in Nina that now posed a new threat. After all, Nina had already seen how badly things could go when emotions overpowered reason, and Sasha, too, had once nearly lost everything in her grief. Now, that same recklessness seemed to be returning. But this time in the form of dangerous trust, misplaced loyalties, and covert operations led by Anna. What Nina couldn't admit to anyone, not even herself, was that her obsession with Sasha's choices was no longer about worry. It was about power. Nina had lost too much already, Willow's affection, Michael's respect, and a place in a family she never truly felt part of. Sasha's rejection now felt like the final strike. But more than the sting of exclusion was the haunting fear that maybe Nina was right all along, that Sasha wasn't ready to make decisions alone, and that by trusting the wrong people, she might be putting herself and Daisy in greater danger than ever before. Ironically, Nina's fear was not entirely unfounded. Sasha, acting out of desperation, had put a massive amount of trust in Anna, a woman under scrutiny herself, haunted by her own past failures. And when it came to navigating the politics and emotional minefields of Port Charles, no plan was foolproof. Especially not one executed in the shadows. But the turning point came when Nina discovered something even more alarming. Sasha had recently been in danger, not just theoretically, but physically, because of Willow. It hadn't been intentional. But a confrontation gone wrong had nearly placed Sasha in a situation that could have ended disastrously. For Nina, this was a tipping point. It confirmed every fear she had suppressed. Validated her belief that Sasha was surrounded by people who didn't truly understand how fragile she still was. And it was in this distorted moment of clarity that Nina made a new decision, a reckless, dangerous one. She would intervene, not as a friend, not as a protector, but as a force of control. What Nina didn't realize was that her version of protection now bordered on sabotage. She began interfering with logistics Sasha had arranged through Anna. She quietly relayed concerns to Willow, planting seeds of doubt about Sasha's mental state. She even hinted to Michael that perhaps Sasha's departure wasn't entirely voluntary, that perhaps someone was manipulating her. The chaos Nina was causing wasn't random. It was surgical, calculated, deliberate, and above all, it was driven by a deep fear that Sasha might disappear forever, and that Nina would no longer matter to anyone. But in trying to force relevance, Nina was unknowingly creating a new set of dangers. Every whisper, every interference, every subtle manipulation added weight to the delicate framework Sasha and Anna had constructed. The escape plan began to fray. Sasha noticed inconsistencies in communication, unexpected delays, shifts in timing. And though she didn't want to believe it, part of her began to wonder, had she trusted the wrong person again? What made it all more harrowing was that Nina hadn't set out to harm Sasha, not in the traditional sense. She didn't want Sasha to suffer. She simply wanted her to stop running. To stay. To need her. But the more Nina clung to that fantasy, the more erratic her choices became. She was no longer fighting to help Sasha, she was fighting for control. Driven by an obsession that refused to let her be left behind. And in doing so, Nina created exactly what she feared most, danger. Now Sasha wasn't just trying to escape the past or protect Daisy from external threats. She was also contending with the new chaos Nina had summoned. Her decision to exclude Michael and Jason, once a brave stand for independence, had left her vulnerable to emotional sabotage from a woman she once thought she could trust. What was supposed to be a clean, calculated departure had turned into a ticking clock surrounded by shifting loyalties and unspoken betrayals. And still, Nina pressed forward. Convinced that she was the only one who saw the full picture, convinced that Sasha was making a mistake too big to ignore. But what Nina failed to see was the line she had already crossed, the moment when concern became obsession, and protection became peril. In the end, this wasn't just a story about Sasha trying to leave. It was about what happens when the people we leave behind refuse to let go. Nina had become the very storm she once tried to shelter others from, unpredictable, emotional, and dangerously close to losing sight of reality. And if she didn't stop soon, the consequences of her actions wouldn't just shatter Sasha's fragile escape, they might destroy the very thing she claimed to protect. Because sometimes, the greatest threat doesn't come from those who wish us harm. It comes from those who claim they love us too much to let us go. Sasha may be preparing to flee Port Charles, and that singular, desperate choice is rapidly spiraling into one of the most undeniable, fast-approaching disasters the town has seen in years. What began as a quiet, internal decision fueled by maternal instinct and psychological exhaustion has now erupted into a chain of consequences that no one can control. Her plan to vanish with Daisy was meant to be clean, quiet, and protective, a mother's way of shielding her child from the chaos and trauma that had already marred so much of her life. But instead, it has become a catalyst for emotional implosion, social unrest, and the slow dismantling of everything Sasha tried to escape. The moment whispers spread that Sasha was missing, not lost, not kidnapped, but intentionally gone, panic began to seep into every corner of Port Charles. Michael, confused and betrayed, began to question everything he thought he knew about Sasha's mental state. Jason, usually stoic and in control, found himself paralyzed by uncertainty, unable to trace her steps or predict her motives. Nina, already unraveling from recent emotional instability, launched herself into a reckless pursuit of control, believing she could still pull Sasha back from the edge. But Sasha wasn't looking back. That was what terrified them all. She had always been fragile, always in need of support, until now. This version of Sasha was different. Calculated. Focused. Unreachable. She had turned inward, relying on her own instincts. And ultimately placed her trust in Anna, someone detached from the messiness of Sasha's past, someone who wouldn't try to talk her out of doing what needed to be done. In choosing Anna, Sasha had done more than reject Michael and Nina, she had cut herself loose from the emotional systems that once defined her, and in doing so, disrupted the balance of everyone connected to her. As word spread that she had potentially escaped under the cover of night, aided by resources well outside Michael's or Jason's control, the collective reaction shifted from confusion to alarm. Because now it wasn't just a woman leaving town, it was a mother vanishing with a child, without legal proceedings, without co-parenting agreements, without a trace. The implications were massive. Legal, emotional, reputational, and dangerous. Worse still, Sasha's silence was its own kind of weapon. She left behind no explanation, no goodbye, no apology. Just a void. And in that void, everyone was forced to confront uncomfortable truths: Michael's failure to protect her, Jason's inability to see the signs, Nina's emotional manipulation, Willow's lingering resentment. The departure exposed everything, every weak spot, every fractured relationship, every buried secret. And while Sasha was attempting to run from danger, she may have inadvertently invited new ones in. Nina, panicked and desperate to regain control, began interfering in ways that bordered on sabotage. She manipulated the narrative, twisted facts, and hinted to Willow and Michael that Sasha may be unstable, dangerous even. It was a betrayal masked as concern, but it had consequences. Legal inquiries were opened. Anna came under scrutiny. And Sasha, wherever she was, suddenly found herself being hunted by the very people she once tried to protect. Now, Port Charles is bracing itself. Because this isn't just about a missing woman anymore. It's about a town imploding from the inside out. A family fractured by secrets. A community destabilized by obsession and fear. Sasha's escape has confirmed what many tried to deny, that a disaster has already begun. And every moment she remains hidden, every step farther she takes, the closer that disaster creeps to the surface. No one can stop it now. The shock has already set in. The consequences are already unfolding. And the fallout? It's only just beginning.